That was the closest the United States came to a war that economists estimated would cost somewhere between $300 billion and $1 trillion in the first year alone. But here's what I keep coming back to. Trump's Secretary of Defense had told him not to do it. His intelligence chiefs had warned him the cost would be catastrophic. His military advisors had run the scenarios, and the results were not good. He listened. Barely. And this time, the war didn't happen. But here's the question nobody's really asking. Why does this story feel so familiar? Because we have been here before. Not metaphorically. Not roughly. Precisely. Almost step by step. And the empires that didn't have someone like Mattis in the room, they didn't get a second chance. Let's go back roughly 1900 years to a man named Marcus Ulpius Traianus, the Emperor Trajan, the most successful military commander Rome ever produced. By 116 AD, Trajan had pushed Rome's borders further than they had ever been, or ever would be again. He'd conquered Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, and he stood on the shores of the Persian Gulf and reportedly wept, because there were no more worlds left to conquer. His advisors had been warning him for months. The supply lines from Rome to Mesopotamia were nearly 3,000 miles long. The local population was hostile. The terrain was brutal. Holding this territory would cost more than taking it. Trajan ignored them. He was Trajan. What could go wrong? Within 2 years, virtually every province he'd just conquered was in full rebellion. He died on the way back to Rome, never seeing his capital again. His successor, Hadrian, abandoned everything Trajan had taken. The cost, roughly $50 billion in today's money. For territory, Rome held for less than 3 years. But the Romans didn't learn. Emperor after emperor, decade after decade, the same cycle. By the 3rd century, Rome was spending over 70% of all tax revenue on the military. Roads crumbled. The currency was so debased it was essentially worthless. Entire provinces stopped sending taxes because what was the point? Sound familiar? Hold that thought. Fast forward 1,700 years. Different empire, same script, almost suspiciously the same script. The British Empire at its height in 1920, 13.7 million square miles, 458 million people, the largest empire in recorded human history, and the pound sterling was effectively the world's reserve currency. But here's the number they don't put on the tourist posters. Between 1815 and 1914, 100 years of so-called Pax Britannica, the era of British peace, Britain launched over 230 military interventions around the world, more than 2 every single year, and every single intervention drained the treasury, some a little, some enormously, and the whole time there were people inside the British government doing the mathematics, and the mathematics was not good. In 1909, 5 years before the First World War, a senior Treasury economist submitted a classified report to the British cabinet. His conclusion? If Britain entered a major European war, the economic cost would be so severe and the recovery so prolonged that Britain would never again be the dominant global financial power. The report was noted, debated, and ultimately set aside. 5 years later, Britain entered the war. The First World War cost Britain the equivalent of $450 billion in today's money. It forced the sale of most of its foreign assets. It broke the pound sterling's global dominance. And then, before any of that was healed, the Second World War. Another $1.5 trillion. the empire Britain had built over 4 centuries was effectively gone within 30 years of that 1909 report being filed away. The report was right, almost to the letter. Nobody listened. An entire empire paid the price. Which brings me to a question I want to hold for a moment, because I think the answer is going to surprise you. Has any empire, any leader, ever actually broken this cycle? Has anyone, standing at the edge of the trap, actually stepped back from it? I'll get there. But first, I need to show you just how deep the American version of this story goes. The United States today spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. I want to say that again, because it genuinely doesn't sink in the first time. More than the next 10 combined. Since 2001, the United States has spent between $6 and $8 trillion on its post-9/11 military operations. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, the broader war on terror. That number comes from the Brown University Costs of War Project, some of the most rigorous academic accounting of military spending that exists. For context, that's enough money to have rebuilt every road, bridge, school, and hospital in America, multiple times over. Instead, American infrastructure currently ranks 13th in the world. 13th, behind the Netherlands, behind Singapore, behind France. And the result of those wars? Afghanistan is under Taliban control. The same Taliban that was in power on September 11th, 2001. Iraq is a fractured state that became a staging ground for the very sectarian conflict that American planners promised the war would prevent. These are not controversial statements. They are the documented conclusions of the US government's own post-war assessments, which brings us back to June 2019, and why I think it's the most important near miss of the modern era. Iran is not Iraq. Let me be precise about this. Iran has a population of 90 million people, a military with genuine regional power projection, one of the most sophisticated missile arsenals in the Middle East, and a network of proxy forces across Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Yemen that would activate immediately in any conflict. The RAND Corporation, America's premier defense think tank, the organization the Pentagon relies on to wargame its own scenarios, concluded that a full conflict with Iran would cost between $300 billion and $1 trillion in the first year, and that America could not achieve a decisive military victory. You could bomb Iran. You could devastate its infrastructure. You cannot occupy it. James Mattis, Trump's first Secretary of Defense, a former 4-star Marine general, a man who had commanded troops in both Gulf Wars, came to the same conclusion. He told the administration, exhaust every diplomatic option first. The military option here has no clean ending. Mattis resigned in December 2018. His resignation letter is, I'd argue, one of the most important documents of the modern political era. He wrote that the president deserved a Secretary of Defense whose views were more aligned with his own. In Washington, that sentence means, I told you the truth, and you didn't want to hear it. Trajan ignored his advisors. His successor had to abandon everything he'd built. The British cabinet set aside the report. They lost their empire within 30 years. The pattern has a name, and I want to show you exactly what it looks like, mapped out, stage by stage. The 5 stages of the war trap. Every empire. Every time. Stage 1. The trigger. A real or perceived threat causes a public demand for response. The trigger is often genuine. The response is almost always disproportionate. Rome. Parthian incursions on the eastern border. Britain. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand. America. September 11th. Stage 2. The confidence trap. The dominant power believes the war will be short, cheap, and decisive. It never is. Vietnam was going to take months. Iraq was going to be, and this is a direct quote from a senior administration official, a cakewalk. It wasn't. Stage 3, the silencing. The experts, the economists, the generals, the intelligence analysts who actually know what wars cost start raising the alarm, and then they start getting ignored, or sidelined, or fired. This is the stage where the trap closes. Stage 4, the spiral. Wars always cost more than projected. Always, without exception. To fund them, empires do one of two things: raise taxes or debase the currency. Both are manageable short term. Both are catastrophic at scale. Both Rome and Britain did both. Stage 5, the irreversible shift. This is the one nobody wants to talk about. The empire survives the war, sometimes, but its trajectory has permanently changed. It doesn't collapse overnight. It contracts. It retreats. It slowly stops being the thing it was, and the people living through it often don't notice until it's already happened. So, I planted a question back at around 7 minutes. Has any empire, any leader, actually broken this cycle? The answer, perhaps surprisingly, is yes. And the way they did it tells us something important. October 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis. 13 days during which the world sat with its finger on the trigger. Every member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff recommended military action. Strike the missile sites. Remove the Soviet threat by force. Kennedy listened to his generals. He heard their case fully. And then, unlike Trajan, unlike the British cabinet, he brought in different voices. Historians, diplomats, people who had studied what happens when a dominant power backs an opponent into a corner with no way out. The answer he got back was the First World War. Kennedy chose a naval blockade, not a military strike. It was slower, it was less certain, but it gave Khrushchev a way to back down without losing face publicly. The missiles were removed from Cuba. American missiles were quietly removed from Turkey in exchange. Cost of that resolution, in dollar terms, essentially zero. Kennedy understood something that Trajan and the British cabinet never fully grasped. Your advisors are not interchangeable. A general tells you what the military can do. An economist tells you what it will cost. A historian tells you what happened last time. A diplomat tells you how to make it stop. You need all of them. And you need to actually listen. And then there's Eisenhower, who took it one step further. As a 5-star general who had commanded the D-Day invasion, the largest military operation in human history, Eisenhower had more military credibility than arguably any American president before or since. He was not a pacifist. He was not anti-military. He had won the biggest war in human history. In his farewell address, January 1961, Eisenhower issued a warning so specific, so precisely worded, that it still reads like it was written last week. He warned that America had built a permanent military establishment and a large arms industry, and that together they had acquired enormous influence. Influence that could, in his words, be felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. He called it the military-industrial complex, and he said, guard against it.
The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
A president who had just commanded the most successful military operation in history, warning his own country that it had built a machine that profits from war, regardless of whether any specific war is actually necessary. Kennedy broke one instance of the cycle. Eisenhower named the mechanism that drives it. Both of them, in different ways, were saying the same thing. The trap is real, it's structural, and the only way through it is advisors who are willing to tell you what you don't want to hear. So here's how I want to end this. Not with a verdict, because the story isn't finished, but with something practical. If you want to track whether the pattern is accelerating or breaking, here are 3 things worth paying attention to. 1. Watch who leaves. When senior military advisors, intelligence chiefs, or economic counselors resign, especially multiple resignations in a short period, that is stage 3 of the war trap. The silence is closing in. It doesn't tell you war is coming, but it tells you the feedback mechanism that prevents wars is breaking down. 2. Watch the cost projections. In every case we looked at tonight, the initial cost estimate for a military intervention was catastrophically low, every single time. If you see a very clean, very confident projection for what a conflict will cost, and you don't see independent economists offering counter estimates, that's stage 2. The confidence trap is open. 3. Watch the cycle. We mapped 5 stages tonight. It's not a crystal ball. It's a map. And a map is only useful if you look at it. The trap works because each stage, at the time, feels like the only reasonable option available. Hindsight is not what saves empires. Real-time pattern recognition is. Trajan stood on the shores of the Persian Gulf and wept because there were no more worlds to conquer. He was wrong. The world he hadn't conquered, the one he should have been paying attention to, was the one he was standing on. His own empire, his own treasury, his own advisors, still trying to get a word in. The $300 billion trap didn't spring in 2019, this time. But the mechanism is still there. The pattern is still running. And the question, the only question that actually matters, is whether anyone in the room is listening. If this made you think differently about how power works, subscribe. We do this every week, and drop the empire you think I missed in the comments. I genuinely read all of them.